You're listening to Imperial County SELPA's Improving Outcome for English Learners with Disabilities Meet the Expert series. Welcome to Episode 2. My name is Lupita Holguin Rubio, and I'm joined here with my colleague and friend Vanessa Lopez. And on behalf of Imperial County SELPA's Senior Director, Dr. Deborah Montoya, we welcome you. During Episode 1 of this series, we learned about the value of establishing partnerships between educational leaders from the general education and special education departments in order to help meet the complex needs of dually identified learners. As we consider the diverse needs of our students, we will focus on a very important topic in today's episode. To help us do that, we have a very special guest who will share her expertise, experiences, and recommendations on the topic of English learners with dyslexia. Dr. Karina Quezada is a bilingual licensed educational psychologist and program specialist for the Desert Mountain SELPA in San Bernardino County. Welcome, Dr. Quezada.
Thank you, Lupita, for having me here. It's a pleasure and a joy to join you today. A little bit about myself. I am the daughter of immigrant parents who came to this country looking for a better life for their children. Originally from Guatemala, my family was fleeing the Civil War. I arrived to the States just shortly before my teen years and with zero knowledge of the English language. But I was fully literate in Spanish, which later I came to understand provided me with a tremendous advantage to be able to become eventually fully bilingual and biliterate. In regards to my professional journey, I have been fortunate to participate in various roles in the educational world. Starting off as a bilingual paraprofessional, I was in charge of administering the English language proficiency test to students and just assisting them with their language acquisition. During those years, I was fortunate enough to be mentored by many wonderful teachers from whom I learned a great deal. I later became an intervention teacher, and I was providing Tier 1 and Tier 2 interventions, specifically in the area of reading. Again, working with English language learners and with students who were suspected or were in the process or perhaps even already identified as having a disability. Again, very enriching kind of experience where I learned a lot about reading and interventions, specifically addressed for reading. I later became a school psychologist, and I was, my one and steady assignment was a school that had a high population of bilingual Hispanic students. And I just completely loved that. And that became my most precious school that I never gave up. I had other schools assigned to me, but I loved that one. And I think that's where I became interested and passionate, and it became a specialty for me to be able to conduct bilingual assessments to ensure that children that were being suspected of having a disability were truly demonstrating a disability and not just a language difference. Equally important for me at that time was to ensure the participation of our parents at the IEP table. That school was located in a very low socioeconomic neighborhood, and our parents didn't always have a voice. So I needed to ensure ways in which parents were heard at the table, and that the evaluations that I was sharing with them, the results that I was sharing with them, were meaningful for them and understandable to them. So out of all those interests, I later transitioned to the Desert Mountain SELPA office. I wanted to have a bigger impact and be able to assist our general education, special education teachers and our administrators in learning and understanding and improving practices that had impacted me throughout the years, both in relationship to reading acquisition, language acquisition, and also in relationship to best practices for evaluations for special education, and also how to engage parents and empower them and allow them to have a voice. Lupita, this question is very complex, and I believe that it requires several layers to answer it fully. I will try to address a few aspects of it during this time that we have together. I truly believe that our greatest investment is on teacher education and professional development. As practitioners, administrators, and support staff, it is our obligation to continue to improve our practices and to continue to grow in each of our disciplines. And in regards to dyslexia, we are all responsible for ensuring that we're up to date with the research and with what we know works for children. There is a wealth of research that expands almost back to 40 years. We know very well what's required for children to learn to read. Reading requires systematic, explicit, direct, multisensory, and sequential instruction. Children do not learn to read simply by being exposed to reading. We also know that teacher preparation programs do not necessarily prepare our teachers for that task. But when we know better, we do better. And I think it's critical that each of us assume our role and that we continue to educate ourselves and to seek the development, the professional development that is necessary in order for us to grow. As school psychologists, I think it's also important that we become very well versed in reading and reading acquisition in order to be able to determine what is truly a learning disability as opposed to a learning difference. This is especially true when we're talking about children who are underrepresented and children of color who are often misdiagnosed because of a language deficit. When we understand the science of reading, we can engage in teaching that is geared for the specific needs of the students and that it is data-driven. As I was contemplating this question, I was trying to think back of how long it's been since I've known this group of individuals that are working in this project. And I want to say probably about 5-6 years ago is when I first became aware of Dr. Montoya and her work with English language learners. And since then, I gravitated toward your website, to your resources, and have, in as much as time has allotted me, to participate in the various trainings that you have put together. And with the use of technology nowadays, that we have all been forced to use a virtual platform that has become a little more accessible to be able to attend your trainings. So that's certainly one way in which I have benefited by the work that you have completed. I think your work has also allowed me the opportunity to become far more acquainted with the California Practitioner's Guide for Educating English Learners with Disabilities. The trainings that you have developed have informed my own practice and have informed my own trainings that I have developed. And just being able to consult with administrators and general and special education teachers and even parents about best practices and how to work with students. I also love the infographics that you have designed in the last year or so that I became aware of it. So I love those. And I think also one of the things that I've appreciated is just being able to email and sometimes even a phone call to Dr. Montoya, and I know that I will get a sound, formulated response to my questions. So having a resource to tap into has been very beneficial, and I truly appreciated that. I think a final thought for me is that I view reading as a civil right. And ensuring that we do whatever is necessary for children to be reading is critical in our work. We know that children that do not read by third grade have a greater chance of dropping out of school and engaging with the judicial system. The National Reading Panel back in 2000, so almost 23 years ago, identified those practices that we know work for all children, including children who are learning English. And those same practices are effective for even students who are coming from a disadvantaged home or from a well-off home. So our practices should be the same and equal to all students. And I think I'm encouraged as I see a movement that has revived and an interest in the topic of reading, in the topic of dyslexia, and I'm encouraged by that. And I also encourage the work that we are continuing to do through these grants that will allow us to move the needle forward in a direction that will guarantee that civil right for all students, including those students that have a disability and those students that are coming from where English is not their primary language. Yeah, I think there's a few of those throughout my years in education, but I don't think that any of those are as inspiring to me as having a grandchild who has a disability. And having him join the education system and from day one hitting those obstacles and those roadblocks. And sitting on the other side of the table as a consumer has been very eye-opening as to how we relate with families. And I think that's where my motivation to allow families to have a voice at the IEP team comes from, because I have now to advocate for my grandchild and to educate our IEP team members on, first of all, how to address our families, not to make assumptions about the origin or the limitations of our families, facing even microaggressions simply because we share a certain surname. So there were assumptions made about my family and assumptions made about my grandbaby. So that, I think, is a motivation for me of how do I continue to advocate for children. But I think one way of doing that is by empowering our families and educating them of their rights. Yeah, our work is not done. We still have a lot of awareness that we need to continue to bring. And there's still a lot of our practitioners who still feel that dyslexia is not a topic that we discuss in the school setting. I still find many school psychologists that don't know how to diagnose dyslexia and are afraid of it and do not know how to go about it, even though they might be doing probably about 90-95% of the things that are correct, but not having that knowledge to be able to call it out and identify it by name and calling it and affirming whether it exists or doesn't exist. Equally, I think we still have a lot of work to do in regards to the instruction that our teachers are delivering to our students. There's still that controversy of whether we're going whole language, phonics, where is the middle? And then when we add the layer of an English learner, what is an appropriate approach for an English learner? Do we teach them vocabulary? Do we teach them phonics? there's a lot of misconceptions, a lot of ambiguity about how we address the whole topic of reading. So even though I do believe that we have made some gains as a state, and there's a lot of movement and a lot of talk, and I think part of that is due to those grassroots movements that parents are organizing, which once again brings me to the power that families have in advocating for their children. So even though we've made a lot of progress, I think there's still a lot that needs to be done. Our work is not over. And for me, specifically, even though it may seem introductory and basic to be talking about what dyslexia is and what it isn't, and how do we diagnose, I'm still finding that individuals, professionals, are needing that basic information. So I'm committed and inspired and motivated to continue to bring that information forward. Yeah, for general education teachers, I think it's about going back to the basics of what we know. And I'm just going to cite the National Reading Panel. Take a look at that document. Even the California Dyslexia Guidelines that were published in 2017 provide some very basic information about what dyslexia is. And that document alludes to the National Reading Panel, and it addresses those 5 components of reading. I think that's our beginning stage right there of addressing phonemic awareness, phonics, fluency, vocabulary, and comprehension. And really look at your curriculum, your daily instruction, and how are you targeting those pieces, or are you? And how are you assessing those components, or are you? And just really analyzing, and I think sitting down with maybe our grade level and talking about where are we with this and how are we addressing this. And I think if I'm talking to our general education staff, I think it's also important for me to say in this moment that it is our obligation to address this. All students are general education students first, whether they're English learners or whether they are already identified as special education students. Even special education students are general education students first. So, and the other important thing is, it doesn't matter what grade level the student is, because I think that's another obstacle that we sometimes run into. There is the notion that I am a 5th grade teacher, or I am a 9th grade teacher, and therefore I don't teach reading anymore. That was meant for my primary elementary teachers. But that's not the case. We have students who are in the upper grade or junior high or high school grades who are reading at a 1st grade level. So it is our obligation and it is our duty to determine what their gaps are and to address those gaps. So I think that the use of assistive technology is a critical component, right, that can provide access to core content. If you think about those applications that would allow students to be able to be read to, or for them to be able to speak into a device to be able to capture their thoughts and what would be writing, right? I think those are essential pieces that our general and special education staff need to incorporate. I don't necessarily see them as crutches. However, I do want to say that if that is the only approach and the only intervention that we're utilizing, that we're truly not addressing the root cause, right? But in conjunction with an intervention, when we're adding the layer of an assistive technology, that can be so beneficial for our students, and it provides access to core content. So absolutely. How do we address those myths? I think we address that by educating ourselves first, right? Because that's when you also see even our professionals who are sitting at the table sometimes have those misconceptions themselves, and they throw remarks that, no, not quite, that's not quite correct. So I think it's a matter of educating ourselves and sharing that knowledge with others, and gently, right, correcting and informing them of what we know. You're absolutely right. It's not about letter reversals. We know that only a small percentage of students actually show that. We also know that there's a lot of misconception about intelligence level for students that have dyslexia. Many consider them to not have an average, and actually that's not true. We know that students can even be gifted and talented and still show deficits with reading. But I think it goes back to educating ourselves and being really that voice that brings clarity and knowledge about the topic, and not be afraid of it. I think I'm going to go back to that because I hear this still, that many feel that, oh, well, that's a medical thing. It's a neurological thing, so you need to go and speak with a neurologist about it, when it truly is an educational component. And when we don't have that information readily available to share with parents, with administrators, with our colleagues, we lend ourselves to be influenced by others. And others, I mean advocates or individuals who are there to make a profit and to sell us, this lenses with tint that are promising to correct, the problem. So we're looking for quick solutions to something that is far more complex. So I think education is a key factor here. Yeah, so I'm wondering about this question, Lupita, if you're going for this from the pre-referral process, because that is a completely different approach, right? If we're looking at it from a pre-referral process, I would want to ensure that we have data to support that the child actually is not making progress, and that we have ruled out factors related to language learning deficits and more about learning disabilities. So I think I'm going to reference, because this is a good opportunity to reference the California Practitioner's Guide. There is a particular table there that addresses language differences and as opposed to learning disabilities. And there's a great table comparison of the different behaviors that you can expect students to demonstrate when they're truly demonstrating a learning disability as opposed to a language difference. So I would refer folks to that. But also consider, I think when we're talking about reading specifically, I would want to consider what the research says, that if the student is acquiring and continuing to acquire oral language and that piece is taking off, but their reading is not, that should be a flag for us. And that should indicate that there might be other issues going on. So that would be at the pre-referral stage. But when we're talking about a child who we now have determined that those factors are indeed alarming and that we know we need to act on, once we are at the referral stage and we're actually assessing a student, I think it's critical to have a bilingual staff member who is involved in that. And I know that that's not always possible, but whenever that is a possibility, we should make that available to our students. And sometimes that means going across town and tapping into the expertise of a colleague who may not necessarily be at my school site, but I can tap into their knowledge from another school. Why do we want to do that? We want to do that because we want to really ascertain that the student is demonstrating a deficit in both languages, because that's truly the sign for us to know whether this is a learning disability or just a language difference. So being able to do a true bilingual assessment is important. I know that that's not always possible, that sometimes we have to use other measures when we don't have access to an individual who speaks the language of the student. But ruling out those components is critical. I also think it's important for us to consider having that multidisciplinary approach where we are tapping into the knowledge of our speech and language pathologists who can add an additional lens of language development. They're experts in that, and ensuring that we have a full team that can consider each individual piece of language. I think that when we are looking at those considerations, we really need to engage in a self-analysis, right? What is our instruction looking like? Are we providing those explicit pieces of teaching that address reading? Do we know exactly where the student is and what the gaps are, and how and what are we utilizing to address those? Another important question that we need to engage in is, are we providing English language development? And all of it, right? Do we know that? You'll be surprised, many times when I would get a referral and I would ask about the language acquisition level of the student, some of my teachers would say, no, they speak English. But then I would go back to the CUME and there's a home language survey that indicates otherwise. And there have been assessments done every year that indicates otherwise. But it's not a common thought or knowledge, which lends me to believe that perhaps we're not necessarily addressing the designated and integrated ELD component for that student. So if we're truly not addressing those needs, how can we really say that this is a disability? So before we look at the child and diagnose the little fish, right, in the aquarium, we need to really look at the aquarium and what is the quality of that aquarium? And because it does not make sense to go and diagnose the little fish in it. We need to really look at the system.